Hey everyone, welcome to our first community webinar on churn prevention. I'm Michael, I'm co-founder and CEO of Qonversion. Qonversion is a platform for mobile apps with in-app subscriptions. And Qonversion allows quick in-app subscriptions implementation. It provides accurate subscription analytics thanks to server-side receipt validation and tools to battle churn and even A/B testing capabilities. And let me introduce our guests today, Alice and Paul, retention consultants at Phiture. Hey guys, how are you doing today? Maybe you can tell us a couple of words about Phiture and yourself.
Hi there, great, thanks. Thanks again for having us on. We are Phiture. We are a mobile growth consultancy based in Berlin, which is led by ex-SoundCloud growth leads Andy Carville and Moritz Dan. We've had the pleasure of working with a lot of really interesting products over the last few years that span across different sort of service verticals. And we've contributed to the mobile growth space through our sort of industry acclaimed mobile growth stack and the ESO stack. I'm Alice. I'm a senior consultant on the retention team at Phiture. So I'm going to be talking to you today about how to kind of formulate a monetization strategy specifically through CRM. And I'll pass you over to Paolo, who is my colleague who will also be speaking in this webinar.
So today, Alice, Paul, and I will provide tips and strategies on reducing churn. And before we jump in, just a couple of notes about this webinar. You are automatically muted. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use our chat. And we'll have some time after the presentations to answer your questions. This webinar is being recorded and we'll be able to share the link to the video in a couple of days after the webinar. And the good news is that our presentations are fairly short, like 15 minutes, and we won't take all your time, and I'm sure it will be interesting and packed with knowledge. So let's dive in. Today we are discussing churn and churn prevention, and probably the most crucial metrics of any subscription app are the lifetime value, or LTV in short, the retention rate, and the opposite side of the retention, the churn rate. Identifying, measuring, and understanding your churn is essential for your app's growth strategy. And the main questions about churn are the following. What is your churn rate? At what point the subscribers are churning? What are the reasons for churn? And what can be done to reduce churn? Without answering these questions, there is a risk of wasting your time on testing some random strategies. You can even make things worse if you are not measuring churn and LTV, for instance, and you start changing the pricing, some features of your app. You can be losing revenue in the long run without even realizing it. So let's have a look at these questions one by one. And we can start with defining the churn rate using the simplest definition and formula. So customer churn is the percentage of customers that stopped using your service during a certain time frame. And you can calculate churn rate by dividing the number of customers lost during a time period, let's say a month, by the number of customers you had at the beginning of that time period. So, for example, if you start a month with 400 customers and at the end you have 380 customers, your monthly churn rate is 5%. You lost 5% of your subscribers. And the churn is directly affecting your subscribers' lifetime value. So after all, probably the single most important metric of your app is your subscribers' LTV. And you should be focusing on maximizing the LTV, and it needs to be higher than your subscriber user acquisition cost. So the most basic LTV formula is the subscription price divided by the churn rate. And you can immediately see from that formula that the higher the churn rate, the lower your LTV is. This is why measuring and reducing churn is so important. But the simple formula that I show here works only in case of linear churn, where the percentage of churning subscribers is the same for every billing period. But the reality, of course, is more complex. The churn rate of subscription app is not linear, and calculating LTV can be much more complicated. I actually have written an article on calculating subscription LTV, and I'm not going to dive into details and formulas here. You can just check this article by using this QR code on this page. And this article includes Excel template that you can use to quickly get your LTV estimates using the App Store historical data, and you can even build it for of subscribers LTV with several historical data points. And now let's get to our second question. At what point the subscribers are actually churning? As I mentioned, the actual mobile subscription churn is not linear. So subscribers leave at a higher rate in the first billing periods. And here is a sample churn curve for a monthly subscription plan. Our data shows that the median churn rate after the first billing period is 42%, declining gradually with every month. So one of obvious ideas by looking at this chart, it's obvious that it's more important to focus on decreasing the churn in the first several billing periods, as it provides the higher leverage compared to targeting later periods. And another important piece of data, free trials cancellations. Providing free trials has proved to be effective within consumer subscriptions, and our data shows that subscription plans that offer a free trial drive 70% of total apps revenue. But the question is whether it's necessary to calculate the trial cancellation rate and include it in your churn metric somehow, and actually that's up to you. But you need to understand that though free trials are effective way of monetizing subscriptions, of getting people to try your product, but more than 50% of trials are being canceled. And we have issued subscription benchmarks report at Qonversion, and it shows the following. First, 40% of trials are being canceled within the first 24 hours after the trial start. And second, from 70 to 85% of trials do not convert into paying subscribers. So there is a massive opportunity to increase your subscriber base by addressing customers churning during a trial period. Now let's have a look at the churn reasons. And here it's very important to distinguish between voluntary and involuntary churn. When a user cancels a subscription or a trial, that is voluntary churn. But a significant share of churn is attributed to billing issues. A user didn't cancel a trial, but the App Store wasn't able to charge users payment method to renew the subscription or to convert a trial into paying customer. So our data shows that at least 10% of churn is due to billing issues. And the levels of involuntary churn vary significantly for different countries. And the tactics to address this type of churn are different compared to those tactics that address voluntary churn. So in Qonversion, we do provide accurate data on all subscription status changes, including events like trial billing retry, subscription billing retry, trial cancellation, and subscription cancellation. That's the chart shown here with all these subscription events. And this allows you to understand the reasons why users do not convert or renew their subscriptions and distinguish easily between voluntary and involuntary churn. So once you have the accurate data on changes to a trial or subscription status, you can automate customer communication using this data. So for example, using Qonversion, you can detect events like subscription billing retry or trial billing retry almost in real time. And then you can trigger a push notification or send a personalized email to that user to try win this user back. And Qonversion provides push notifications, webhooks to build any custom logic on your side, and the integration with MailChimp, for example, to communicate with clients with billing issues or those clients that are canceling trials and subscriptions. So let's have a look at the example of involuntary churn communication. In this case, you basically want to remind the users to fix their payment method on file with Apple and Google, or other payment methods they use, like Stripe credit card. And here is an example of such communication from Grammarly. So they just point to the fact that they haven't been able to receive the payment, and they provide within this communication, within this email, they provide the link to update billing details for the customer. And now let's look at voluntary churn communication. In cases when your users are making conscious decision to cancel a trial subscription, you can follow the next steps. First, you need to detect such events, and then you can send a push notification and show in-app screen asking for cancellation reasons to these users. And after that, you can offer them a discount. And by the way, you can set up such in-app screens directly in Qonversion. So once you collect the responses and rank the cancellation reasons, you can address the most important of them. So if your users cancel, for example, because the price is too high, you should be experimenting with pricing and durations of the in-app products that you are offering. And if there are some features lacking, then you need to consider adding those features. But the general idea is that you need to identify and address the most popular cancellation reasons first. So as promised, my presentation is fairly short. That's it from me today. Alice and Paul will now share their insights on addressing churn and reducing it. I'm happy to hand this over to Alice.
Thank you, Michael. So just to kind of touch on the sort of CRM perspective. So what we kind of say to our clients when they're looking to build a monetization program through CRM is that you really want to lay the foundations to set you up for success. So quite often we see companies or apps that come to us and they've maybe tried CRM here and there, but they haven't really done much or kind of built out a full CRM program, and they're really excited to dive into basically engagement and monetization. And what we kind of say to our clients is that in order to monetize your users through CRM, you really need to first get them invested in the product. So in short, if they don't understand the product or what the core value is, then they're unlikely to start a trial or pay for a subscription. So what we would kind of say at this point is that you really should be carving out a holistic strategy that first focuses on getting users through the different areas of the life cycle, particularly these first two areas. So like new users and onboarding these new users, and then activating them as well, making sure that you are kind of pushing them along the life cycle so they're creating that habit around your core value prop. And then once you've got users activated and they're kind of excited about the product, it's at that point really where your kind of conversion experiments are going to be the most successful. I'm just going to pass over to Paolo, who's going to talk a bit more about that early stage.
Awesome.
Are you there?
Everyone, can you hear me fine now? Hello?
Yeah, you can hear it right now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry about that issue earlier. I'm having a little bit of a lagging connection today. But yeah, cool. So early user experience. So picking up from Alice's point, we can definitely say then that it's essential for you to lay the foundations of your life cycle strategy in order to support a robust monetization program, right? So taking this into account, I like to stress the importance of early user experience and value perception, which is of course a must to prevent churn. And we often see people in the growth industry working mostly towards optimizing those funnels that are present in the paid experience, and then neglecting free user experience, even though value perception begins as soon as the user interacts with the product for the first time, right? So when it comes to very early user experience, there are a few journeys that can definitely contribute to reduce churn. The first one is, of course, free user onboarding, right? So at this stage, you should definitely be providing your users with the very best of your free experience, guiding them through the core actions of your product. And my tip here is for you to focus on one or at most two most valuable aha moments for you to promote and for you to educate your users. And that's pretty much linked with my next topic, which is feature education and habit formation. And at this stage, it's very important for you to educate users about the different use cases of your product in a very brief and clear way. And always keeping in mind that different personas, so different types of users, will engage with your product in very particular ways. So understanding what each of these personas value and tailoring the experience accordingly is key for you to retain those users and even to drive them into starting a trial. And that comes, of course, to my last point, which is trial onboarding. And the goal during trial onboarding is pretty much the same as the previous one, right? Always guide your users through the most valuable features. So in this case, guide your trialers through the most valuable features of the paid experience, and always keep highlighting the benefits of your subscription.
Great. So once you've once you've kind of got those foundations in place and you know how to kind of get started with your lifecycle marketing, and you're ready, you've got your users engaged and excited about your product, you're ready to kind of dive into your monetization strategy. What I would recommend is the next step is really to generate that deep understanding of the different user personas in your app. Quite often we see companies take a one-size-fits-all approach to subscription optimization without understanding the impact of certain variables. And there are some variables that Paolo and I in our work at Phiture have come across which can really affect your monetization strategy and sometimes kind of set you on a completely different path than you originally thought that you were going to be on. So some of them are, for example, level of engagement. We want to, for example, segment users depending on their level of engagement. And in some cases, you could even show them different upsell comms based on their level of engagement as well. An example of that would be perhaps showing the annual subscription to more engaged users versus showing maybe like a monthly subscription to users that are less engaged, for example. Another one is country, currency, and language. So that's kind of like a group of variables together. What I would recommend that you do when you're getting started with monetization is really asking yourself the question, okay, what are my focus markets? And these markets that I'm focusing on, are they actually going to produce a return on investment on our efforts? And I think that quite often what we see is that, again, companies getting really excited about, just diving straight into monetization, and they kind of localize in to loads of different languages. And what I would say is keep your strategy focused and simple. Pick your key markets, particularly if the app prices are localized as well. We want to make sure that that we're kind of looking into that return on investment question as well. And as lots of CRM managers will tell you, that localization in itself is no easy task. So we want to just kind of make sure that we have a plan to tackle that as well. Another thing that you might want to think about in terms of strategy is auto renew on versus auto renew off. So you might also want to kind of segment users based on whether or not they have auto renew on their subscriptions. And if they don't, then you might even want to kind of test some more aggressive CRM campaigns, particularly around the kind of final month or two of their subscription as well. And then another thing that you might think about is to look into the acquisition traffic sources, and depending on the type of product, you could potentially serve different kind of upsell comms. For example, you might want to kind of serve users that have come in through TikTok ads, for example, with like video features, and you might want to kind of look at different types of content to serve based on those acquisition sources as well. And then once you've kind of got all of this foundation in place, and you feel like you've got a strong, clear and focused strategy, what I would recommend is something similar to what I said at the beginning, where instead of trying to tackle all of these different monetization stages in one, I would actually break it down into basically like a kind of different monetization stages. So what we have here are trial starts, for example. So that's probably one of the hardest stages because you're getting free users to actually pay money for your product. And then what the next stage would be the free trial onboarding. So once you've actually managed to convert users to start in a free trial, the last thing you want to do is to just kind of wash your hands of those users and never speak to them again. We want to make sure that we're guiding those users through the product and showing them what the difference with the premium product is and where the value is as well. And then, of course, you've got the trial to membership conversion as well. So depending on how long your free trial is, you might want to have a specific strategy for those final days of the free trial onboarding to ensure that you're really getting that best chance of users converting to the paid membership. And then we've got membership retention, which is not dissimilar to normal or general retention. We want to make sure that we're continuing to communicate and personalize our comms for users throughout their membership and ensure that they're getting the value from the membership as well. And of course, you've got your churn prevention and win back strategies. So for users that have lapsed in terms of the engagement with the product or potentially users that have their subscription is already lapsed, you might want to carve out a separate, perhaps more aggressive strategy for them as well. And then what I would say in terms of just how to kind of run this through CRM, I would suggest that what you do is take each monetization stage and validate or test a few different hypotheses. For example, if you started with trial starts, test a few different hypotheses, and once you've validated some hypotheses there, my recommendation would be to scale that up into what we call in CRM like a canvas or user journey. And once that's kind of scaled and automated, and you know that it's proving uplift, at that point you can then move on to like the different monetizations stage, for example, free trial onboarding. Oops, here we go.
Here we go.
Awesome. Back to you.
Well, awesome. Can you hear me fine still?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Cool. So, well, I think we cannot leave the room without mentioning the most important part of churn prevention, which is, of course, retaining your customers, retaining your subscribers. And yeah, on that note, I like to say that, it's quite well known in the industry nowadays that retaining a current customer is much cheaper than acquiring a new one. And for subscription-based apps, customer retention is quite tricky, right? Because subscribers are often repeating their purchase decision at every renewal period. So that means that nurturing the relationship that you have with those subscribers and consistently showcasing the value of your premium product, it's pretty much important, and it becomes much more important when you have products that are based on subscription and therefore into recurrent revenue. And so you need to keep your customers satisfied so they will renew at every renewal period, right? And on this topic, I like to share 2 tips with you today. The first one is for you to use personalization in your lifecycle strategy in order to make your efforts more relevant to paid users, right? So in this example that I brought to you today from SoundCloud, basically they send this message at the end of free trial period, and basically they are trying to show you, and they personalize the message with the amount of minutes that you saved from skipping ads, and that you actually spend that time listening to more music, right? So they're pretty much promoting a USP that is pretty much relevant to the user, which is skipping ads, and is one of the most enjoyable ones as well. So definitely use personalization as much as possible to showcase the value of your premium experience. And my second tip is for you to then analyze and identify common user behavior that usually lead to high levels of engagement as well as to churn, and try to optimize your user journey accordingly, right? So my recommendation here is for you to deep dive into the top 25% most engaged users, as well as the bottom 25% least engaged users, and then identify what are the behaviors that lead to high levels of engagement and to disengagement for you to shape your your journey, taking that into account, right? And lastly, I want to talk with you about involuntary churn. Let me just skip the slide. So yeah, I want to talk about involuntary churn, as it accounts for a considerable share of customer churn for subscription-based apps, and most of them due to payment failures, right? And that's pretty much because of the complex nature of financial transactions that usually requires a payment to be validated by various gatekeepers, right? So there are like plenty of intermediators over that journey, over a transactional journey. So it creates plenty of room, plenty of opportunity for failure, right? And that can be like from outdated payment detail to an issue with the card network. So there are like many steps within the payment journey that can actually lead to involuntary churn. So our recommendation here is for you to basically to double down your attention to voluntary churn and try to map the milestones, so like the steps, the main steps of your product's payment journey, identifying the main reasons that lead to churn, so that leads into a failure to happen, and design automated solutions. I repeat, automated solutions to each of these churn issues, to the churn reasons, right? Awesome. And well, this is pretty much the presentation that we prepared for you today. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to listen to us this evening. And yeah, basically, we're going to start the Q&A session in a few moments. And we also left our contact information in case you want to reach out to ask any questions or to discuss any of the points that were brought to you today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Alice. Thanks, Paul. It was interesting. I actually do have a question from my side to you, since you also mentioned involuntary churn and distinguishing between involuntary and voluntary churn, and I talked about this as well. From your practice, what should be like the primary consideration if you're just starting with reducing your churn, right? Where should you focus? Do you think you should initially focus on like voluntary churn, or you should start with involuntary churn? What's like the best practice from what you see?
That's a good question.
Well, when it comes to
oh, sorry, Paolo, you go ahead.
All right, I'll go ahead. I think my connection is lagging a little bit, so there's a little bit of delay. So yeah, like when it comes, and feel free, Alice, to jump in as well and to complement my answer. But yeah, when it comes like to where to tackle first, like what to tackle first, I recommend you first analyze your churn data to identify how much of your churn, like what's the portion of churn that comes from voluntary and involuntary churn, right? And it ends up, if it ends up being like that your part, a relevant part of your revenue, it's being taken by involuntary churn, definitely start by there. But usually most of it will come from voluntary churn, and this is a little bit more difficult to grasp, right? So definitely involuntary churn should come first, in case it's pretty relevant to your churn, to the amount of churn that you have in total. So like, let's say, for example, 10%, for example, will be a very, very relevant percentage for you to start already with involuntary churn, since it's like pretty much easier for you to put in place. And as soon as you automate all your involuntary churn initiatives, you can pretty much leave it there and let it run and revisit after some time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, to summarize this, it's important to first understand the numbers, right, to see what's causing the most churn, how like involuntary churn is compared to voluntary churn in the numbers, and address what's the most important. But probably voluntary churn is normally it would be higher, right? So you will be better off with addressing, at least with starting addressing voluntary churn first. That makes sense. So we do have like a number of questions in the chat, and Alice, actually I can see is answering there. Maybe we can also like provide these answers to the broader audience here. So I can just read these questions and we can provide answers here. So There is a question from Erica on finding the churn benchmarks for the industry. And yes, I agree with Alice. We do have some benchmarks on churn, and we have issued this benchmark report. At Qonversion, you can easily find it on our website, and I think it's also available even in this handouts section of this webinar. But you can easily find it, just look up Qonversion benchmarks report, and you'll be able to find it. So the next question is it technically possible, from Marcus, is it technically possible to personalize push notifications depending on churn reason? Alice, do you want to provide the answer for that?
Sure. Would you mind repeating the question for me?
Is it technically possible to personalize push notifications depending on churn reason?
Yes. So what I would recommend here is what I would recommend is basically collect the potential reasons for churn, and you could maybe have, like, for example, an in-app that's got some pre-populated reasons, and then an open text field as well, so you could actually gather some open text field responses. And then what I would do, and I think I just wrote this in the chat as well, is I would you can code these in-app messages as long as they're JavaScript enabled. You can code them so that they actually pipe user, like the responses, as user attributes back to your CRM tool. And if you do that, then you would be able to kind of follow up with those users in any channel. So you could follow up on push, email, or in-app. And if it's relevant and you can actually guide those users to I don't know, like maybe another feature that they didn't know about or something like that, for example, you could actually do that through a push notification just using the attributes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question from Marcus as well: what should we show on these personalized in-app screens or within push notifications for those who are unsubscribed?
Yeah, I think Paolo, you should probably jump in on this one too, because I know you've done a lot of personalization work recently. But I think the sort of main attributes or whatever that you can use are things like, you can use like first names. We've actually, it sounds really simple, but we've found that if you even just like use people's names in push notifications, you get like a much better conversion rate. I think that's the same across in-app messages as well. But yeah, in some cases, like we worked with a client recently. I can't actually say the client's name, but we worked with a client in the sporting industry recently, and we were able to kind of figure out what favorite teams, for example, the user had, and so we were able to kind of like send them communications about like season tickets and things like that specifically for and comms specifically around their kind of favorite team. So you can get quite creative with it, especially through in-app messages, and as I said, collecting user responses as attributes as well. Paolo, did you have anything to add? I know you've done a lot of stuff, particularly on like SoundCloud.
There is also a related question to this one with like specific example from Adriana, like what type of messaging can be used instead of "we miss you" tactics? Something not to sound desperate. Basically, the question is asking what other sentences can be used not to sound desperate. Maybe any specific examples.
That's a great question. I think that the best way to not sound desperate is to really, again, it's kind of similar to what I answered before, is to really like personalize your comms as much as possible, so that by the time, if you do get to that stage where the user is about to churn, you really kind of know what all their preferences are and things like that. And so you can send them comms that are more relevant, I guess, to them than just, "we miss you" or whatever, because that doesn't really, I mean, I don't know about you all, but when I get a push notification that says "we miss you," it doesn't really kind of speak to me that much. So yeah, I think just personalizing your comms as much as possible really help there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree with this point, and like to avoid hear me?
Paolo, we can hear you. There's just a wee bit of a lag. He's gone.
Cool. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I just wanted to actually to add up to that point, right? Usually, like when it comes to win back initiatives, there are like plenty of strategies that you can experiment with. Like instead of like, for example, focusing on when miss you, you can definitely maybe use the benefits that the user is missing. So like fear of missing out, basically, in order to re-engage your users that are that are lapsing. Or even present them like there's this thing called like next best action, right? So basically, depending on your user behavior, user previous behavior, you can pretty much predict what will be the next best action that this user would take into the app, that would lead to engagement, right? So definitely test those ideas, like different approaches, and there are like many different approaches that you can test. Try to avoid it. We miss you, or like where are you? It's usually like pretty much common, but pretty much regular, and doesn't strike any kind of emotion into your user, right? So like definitely try to focus on the benefits that the user is missing, and also try to nudge the user by providing with something that is relevant to them. So personalization.
I guess the trick here is to be able to personalize this message. You need to have the data, some specific data on that user, and some way to personalize the message. Otherwise, you'll end up with this like generic same push notification message for everyone. There is also a question on benchmarks for involuntary churn. What percentage we should aim for? I can start with answering from what we see at Qonversion. So basically, the median involuntary churn rate is around 10%, but we also see that it's it varies a lot based on different factors. One of them is the country. So like emerging markets have higher rate of billing issues, and like Western European, the US market, these markets in general have lower rate of billing issues. And also like specific product and the price could affect this as well. But in general, if you have something below 10%, you are probably doing better than many apps. And if your involuntary churn is significantly higher than 10%, then you definitely need to investigate it further and look in the details and segment it and to try to address it. Alice or Paul, do you want to add anything on involuntary churn, like benchmark?
No, I would say you covered that really well. I don't know, Paolo, did you have anything to add there?
No, I think it was pretty much on point as well. Yeah, I think it's really on point, the point that you mentioned about like the different regions, right? Like there's a geographical difference, and that is pretty much like for all pricing strategies, right? Like always consider the place, the market that you're trying to target when it comes to pricing strategy, and especially also like, of course, for involuntary churn. So yeah, pretty much on point answer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Something
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, Michael. Something that I actually learned just on the topic of involuntary churn recently, and I'm kind of needing to look into this further. But if anyone else has more information on this, please drop it in the chat. But I heard recently that apparently the way that Apple or the Apple in-app purchases works, if a user basically gets a new device I think it's a new device, that their subscription automatically churns, because the way that Apple Pay works, I think it's connected to like a device token, if that makes sense as well. So that was something that I learned recently that I didn't know, that was quite shocking to me.
No, actually, if it's the case of in-app subscription, then this in-app subscription is linked to Apple ID, and there shouldn't be any problems when the user switches from one device to another one. So there shouldn't be problems with that. I think there are no other questions in the chat, and we promise to be short with this webinar. So I think we have answered all the questions. If Alice or Paul, if you want to add something, or we can just wrap it up. And
no, this has been great. As I said, if anybody wants to get in touch with Paolo or myself, our details are there. And yeah, thanks for all your questions. There's been some really interesting questions in there, and it's always great to just be part of the community. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks Alice and Paul. And if you are not already a part of our Slack subscription apps community, please join us there. And this is just our first webinar. There will be more interesting webinars pretty soon. So just thanks again for joining us today. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.